Then you set your default gateway down here. Ignore the fact they're the same address. You hit submit. There you go. You're out of band. Okay, no problems. You want to run your in-band management. Now this is going in the data port with the same port as your traffic, typically. You'd turn IBM on. Okay? You'd put in your address, put in the subnet mask. If you turn tagging on, you'd put in the VLAN ID you want to use, and you pick which port you want to use. Okay? This address and this address should be in different subnets. Okay? My suggestion, if you're going to use in-band management and you're not going to use the out-of-band, leave the out-of-band at the default address. Okay? That way, you know what it is when you take the radio off the tower. It's always the default. Unless that conflicts with your network for whatever reason. If you're using 192.168.100 as a /24 in production, you got to change to something else.
Why didn't that just say out-of-band IP configuration?
Where they're going to change that in the next firmware to say out-of-band.
I think I asked that December to October.
As you can see, we haven't changed the firmware since then. Okay. Now, this is where life gets confusing. Anybody have questions first? Okay. Either one works at the same time. You can do in-band, or you can do out-of-band, or you can do both, like I'm doing right now. I'm in the in-band, remember? Set your default gateway to be whichever gateway you want it to use, based on whichever network you're using. If I wanted it to use my in-band as the default, as the normal network, I would change this address to whatever my gateway is for in-band management. Okay? Think of this like a router. Okay, you got your Cisco 2800 router, whatever the heck router is in there. It's got two interfaces on it. Okay? One of them's IP address 172.16.1.101. The other one's 192.168.100.101. I can route all day back and forth between those interfaces. But I need a gateway of last resort, or a default route. Where do I go if it's not on one of those networks? And I go to that address. Okay. Just think of it that way. The radio doesn't do any routing. I don't want you to think about that. But if you think about it like a router, I think this whole thing becomes mute and there's no confusion.
Question.
Yep.
Both can be enabled at the same time?
Both can be enabled at the same time as long as they're in separate subnets.
But how do you use a common gateway?
The gateway is only used for one of them. Just like it would be on a router.
Okay.
So I can change this gateway. Say I put a public IP address here. 207.68, whatever.
Okay, so just one interface is routable.
Only one interface is routable.
So if you're coming into the cloud, you need to have your gateway IP address for your default gateway.
Yep.
You can't have a generic gateway if you're coming into the cloud, unless you're doing support forwarding stuff.
Typically, you're going to use one or the other. Okay? I don't run into very many people that are trying to use both at the same time. So you set it up the way you want to use it. You leave the other one the way it is. If you're going to use the out-of-band management, my suggestion, leave the in-band management just the way it is by default. Maybe someday you'll thank me for having it turned off. If you're going to do the in-band management, leave the out-of-band management just the way it was so you know what it is later. Change the IBM and the gateway to match what you need to match.
Is this the same for the Strata 24?
Strata-Link's a little bit different. Okay, it only has one IP address, and you choose if it's in-band or out-of-band. I'll show you later today. So, any questions on that? I've got a slide tomorrow that I'll bring back up that might help clarify some of it, and I will let you ask questions tomorrow, even though I told you I'd never talk about it.
I think we only use it when we're dealing with stubs. Normally we do out-of-band and everything. Try to have multiple ways into all these things. So from a telnet, from a debug standpoint, we'll IBM from that into it. Like if we lose we lose a switch on the distant side, then we can't manage it anymore. We lose the out of band.
Yep.
So we have to do it via
Yep.
in band.
Yep.
So we just make sure we have unique A and B settings so we can get to it.
Yep. So that's my suggestion. If it was up to me, I'd run out of band everywhere because I think you're a little safer with out of band. I'll tell you why in a second. And I would leave in-band management as a backup between the radios because exactly like you just said, if you lose a switch on the far side, I can log into the near radio and from the debug prompt I can actually use the in-band management to get to the radio on the far side. And I could confirm then from that radio that the radio's up and running, but there is nothing plugged into it, so the switch must be dead. Or I'm seeing traffic in, going out of the interface, but nothing's coming in from the switch. There's got to be an issue with the switch. So you can do some of that to narrow it down. By default, when we pre-configure, the A side is 172.16.1.1, B side's 172.16.1.2 on VLAN 4085. And it's not basically doesn't go anywhere. It's only across those two radios unless you happen to allow VLAN 4085 out of those two radios. And then because one radio can only ever see the other radio, you don't have to worry about it going anywhere. At least that gives you a way to access the other radio if you need to. Okay. If you plug into the out-of-band management interface, you can only talk to that radio directly. You can see here today, I'm plugged into the in-band management so that I can talk to both radios. That's the advantage of in-band management. Okay? Without a switch on the far side, I can talk to both. I could accomplish the same thing when I'm setting up the link by taking a cable from the data port and moving it to the management port, and looping it from one to the other. But then on the near side, I would have to either have a switch or I'd have to move from the out of band to the data port to manage the far side radio. So in-band can be useful. Okay. Here's the downsides of the in-band management. Say spanning tree blocks my port. Okay, to manage the radio. Say you're over here in the Ethernet settings page, which we're about to go to, and you do something, call it stupid, like this. Turn off the port. And guess what? No way to turn that port back on because you just turned it off via in-band management. Say you like the idea of rapid port shutdown. Link goes down, what does it do? Turns off the ports. Can you log into the radio to find out why it turned the ports off? Nope. Okay. So there's some downsides to IBM. If possible, I think OBM is a better option for you. However, this is coming from a person that's lazy. And I can tell you on the Apex Plus link we have in production, I'm running in-band management on both sides. Because I'm lazy. So if you only want to run one cable up the tower, especially with an Apex Plus, that's where you tend to do in-band management. I think running two cables is pretty darn cheap and gives you a lot of flexibility. But I will not think anything less of you if you want to do IBM. Any questions on IBM?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Not about IBM, but do you have like a restarted